Hello and welcome to the Memory Capsule podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon trading card game community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week, we'll be speaking with our guests about their background with the Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and give them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Dan Ibarra. Dan is a player from the Chicagoland area who has consistently seen success at regionals since 2018 and received an invite for the 2022 World Championships. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing all right, Ralph. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So far, every time I've recorded, I've been doing pretty good, which is good.
That's pretty good. Yeah, the first episode's definitely been pretty high quality, especially, for your first time trying this out. So I've definitely been impressed, and other members of the community have as well.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. We're just complimenting each other back and forth here. I love it. For anyone who's not familiar with you, for anyone who's hearing your voice for the first time and hearing about you for the first time, what should they know about you?
So my name is Hector/Dan Ibarra, man of many monikers. I also have a YouTube channel myself. It's DefCon Inc. on YouTube, and I do different things from competitive analysis of the metagame to different deck profiles, even sometimes vlogs or regionals. When I forget, don't forget to record stuff. So aside from that, I'm into hip hop and rap music a lot. I would listen to a lot of that growing up. Obviously, a big fan of Pokemon. And then I do graphic design, and then what other interests do I have that are cool? I play a lot of Valorant now, unfortunately, but that's
Unfortunately.
taken up a good, yeah, a good portion of time. And, I'm climbing back to gold. I was gold two, and then they placed me bronze two, so
Oh, that's tough.
I'm climbing back, man.
That's like my TFT grind. I didn't play for the last like half season, and I came back and I was iron, and I'm like, all right,
You're like, oh, what
let's do
happened,
it.
man? What
Let's do
happened?
it. How did you get involved with the Pokemon TCG?
So funny thing enough is, so when I was, I want to say 14, my best friend in early childhood, his name was Brian. And one day Brian's mom had come to us one day during the summertime and said, "Hey, there's this really cool card shop by this grocery store that I went to. Do you guys want to go?" Because she knew that we were kind of into the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. And so we had gone, and I had gotten into Yu-Gi-Oh initially. And so I played Yu-Gi-Oh for a couple of years, probably 4 or 5 years up to this point. And then one of my friends, Tyson Sandiford, who's also local to Chicago, had gotten into Pokemon. And one day he had, some money troubles and he wanted to sell off his Pokemon collection. And at the time I was doing a lot of, bind to grind TCG player type of stuff. So I said, "Hey, I'll buy your collection off you." And he said, for the most part, Pokemon is pretty cheap in comparison to Yu-Gi-Oh! I was doing my own research last night. A Reggie deck costs $40.
Yeah.
There are singular cards in a Yu-Gi-Oh deck that you need three of that are more than $40. So the cost of a Yu-Gi-Oh deck is maybe you owning the entire Pokemon metagame, minimum rarity, which is kind of ridiculous when you put that into perspective. But so I purchased all these decks from him, and I was like, you know what? A lot of these cards aren't really that expensive. Stuff like Professor's Researches. At the time, it was Juniper, Ultra Ball, staple cards like that. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll get into Pokemon, learn how to play. I've always been a fan of the video games, and I collected the trading cards here and there. And so I had asked him to build me whatever the best deck was because he owned every deck. And I said, sure, let's go. And I went to a League Cup at Top Cut Comics, or it was a challenge actually. And funnily enough about that is I had gone to this tournament and he had handed me Plume, which for anyone that's unfamiliar, you play the Decidueye GX that, pings for damage counters, much like the Inteleon of the format we have now. And then there was a Vileplume that said that neither player could play item cards. But the thing that made this deck really broken is this card called Forest of the Giant Plants that lets you cheat them into play for free pretty much. But the thing that Tyson had neglected to do was put Forest of the Giant Plants in my deck. So I went 0-4 drop. But
Oh,
I stuck it out just to, learn what the cards did and the different decks. But the whole tournament, I was thinking, man, my deck sucks. I thought this was supposed to be the best deck. I would get to the middle one. What's the...
the Dartrix, right?
Yeah, I would get to Dartrix. I'd be like, man, this is supposed to be the big one. How do I get to the big one faster? Because I don't think the deck played Rare Candy at the time either. So
Probably no reason to,
that
right? Because
was
you're gonna
a
item block also. So why would you
yeah.
play Rare Candy?
It was a tough first tournament for sure. But I think that kind of made me want to win a tournament. So I had taken the game a little bit more seriously after that. And I was like, all right, well, I can't trust Tyson and build my decks anymore. So let me do my own independent research and build my own deck. So
There you go.
that was kind of how I got into the game initially, funnily enough.
Hmm. I don't know if you remember this, but when I got back in the game in 2019, you were one of the first players I played against. I
Oh,
think,
really?
yeah, there was some like random small store in Chicago that was like they haven't done anything since COVID really for Pokemon, but I think that was the first top 8 I got since coming back, and I played against you, and I was on um, Naganadel Blounds, and you were on Ability Zard, and I just remember you going first Welder attach, turn 2 Welder attach, and you were like 9 tails, 9 tails, 9 tails, knocked out 3 Blounds and won the game, and I'm like, oh,
So,
cool, I'm
funnily
back.
enough,
This
that
Dan
is
guy's really scary.
that is the only cup I've ever played Abilities Art in.
Really?
And I lost in top 4 because I prized 3 Welder game 3 against Guardian. I looked at my deck and I was like, huh, there's a lack of supporter cards in this deck, huh? So I got like my turn 2 Welder and then that was it. I didn't get anything else for the rest of the game. But yeah, I actually do remember that cup, funnily enough, because Abilities Art was a really fun deck. It just wasn't a lot of thinking. You just kind of, got in there.
Yeah, you just hit. Some decks like
Yeah.
that feel so good though.
Oh yeah, especially when you go to a tournament and that mental fatigue sits in throughout the whole day. Sometimes you just have to play decks that go, so
Yeah.
you don't get burnt out throughout the day.
Yeah, I've been looking a bit at like post rotation decks, and I've been looking at like Miraidon, and I'm like, like 1 out of every like 4 games, you're just gonna use that like electric generator card, get 2 lightning, attach, knock out a V turn 1, and like that's gonna feel pretty good. Except
Definitely
when you
gives
don't hit.
me
Except when you
Meloetta
don't.
vibes.
Yeah, that too. There's always some deck like that. If you just hit like the 2 or 3 card combo, you're getting a turn 1 knockout. If you don't, you go from there,
Yeah,
right?
we build a strategy later.
Yeah,
We-
it's not just that usually. So, kind of going from going 0-4 at this challenge and not really knowing what the heck's going on with the meta, what did you do to try to grow as a player and get to where you are now?
So I think the best thing to do when you're initially starting out in a game where you don't know what the metagame is like or card interactions is playing a lot. The best way to learn all of the intangibles of Pokemon is just grinding games out. And the problem that a lot of people have when they play test is they don't play against people better than them. And that is a huge problem. Because if you are playing against a middling player and you're also a middling player, the chances of you learning things are kind of low. So let's say towards a 10, right? And little 9-year-old Billy from your league is a 1. If you're like a 5 or a 6 player, you want to be playing against like a 7 or 8 player. That way, they're probably going to beat you the majority of the time, but you're going to learn more losing to them than you are beating on little Billy at locals. And that was something that I had to do is go to a couple tournaments, get whooped, go 1-2, go 2-2 a lot. So that was kind of my experience for the first, month or 2 that I played, but just from having the experience of playing other card games, because at that point I had played Yu-Gi-Oh for 5 or 6 years. I had played Force of Will while that game was still alive. I had played some Magic in my day, mostly Modern, which is our equivalent of Expanded, and then played some EDH. So EDH is a singleton 100 card format. Is kind of what Gym Leader Challenge is based off of. Except in their format, they have 100 cards. We only have 60 because we're playing.
Is that different than Commander?
EDH is Commander. It's
Oh, it is.
Elder
Okay,
Dragon
sorry.
Highlander. Yeah, there's a lot of
Oh,
names for
okay.
it, but it's the same format.
Gotcha. I'm very ignorant of Magic. I have no idea what you're talking
Magic
much about
is
Magic, so
just Pokemon, but you can play on your opponent's turn.
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much the only difference. In your energy is broad, so instead of attaching 3 energy to a Zacian, you would have 3 metal lands, and your metal lands would let your Zacian attack,
Yeah.
or it would get your Zacian into play. So they're fairly similar, but there's a little bit more nuance to Magic. There's a couple of more things that you can do. There's a little bit more complexity.
Yeah. Something I've thought about is like the Pokemon TCG was originally made by Wizards of the Coast, so I wonder how many mechanics from Magic they kind of borrowed and repurposed for the Pokemon TCG, which now are 25 years in, and Magic has not, Wizards has nothing to do with the game, but I'm sure a lot of the mechanics from Magic influenced how the Pokemon TCG works. Looking back.
It's definitely interesting to see how games kind of influence each other because I've definitely seen where a deck will come out in Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, right? And then 2 years later, there's a Pokemon deck that functions
Really?
similarly. Or if I go back 20 years in Magic and I go, oh, there's this certain deck, and oh, it kind of functions like this Yu-Gi-Oh deck 10 years later. And it's definitely interesting kind of how the games influence each other because even in Pokemon now, we see a lot more cards that are kind of complex, where they do things that have not really happened so much in the game before. Like there's a concept of Yu-Gi-Oh called special summoning, where you're able to cheat creatures or monsters or the Pokemon into play without using the normal mechanics. So something like Pokemon that doesn't really exist for the most part. Like we have cards now like the Zoroark with transformation to stage one that will cheat a stage one into play, or we have the Lugia V-Star now that can cheat Archeops into play. So that would be an example of special summoning. So that's why I know there are some Pokemon players that call it special summoning star. And that's kind of the joke around it, right? Because it's like, oh, Lugia is kind of a Yu-Gi-Oh card. It's not really a Pokemon card.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, you just kind of play it straight out of the discard. Huh. I mean, and even just by playing a lot of Pokemon, you start noticing kind of patterns with certain cards coming back from the game. Like, just the longer you play, the more you start noticing of like, oh, this deck's kind of similar to that deck from back then. I wonder if it'll build similarly. I wonder if the gameplay is going to be similar. So I do feel like early on in the Scarlet and Violet meta, how many players who played back when early Sun and Moon, when stage twos were a thing, are going to have kind of a bit of a competitive advantage with the deck building. Because take a player who's only ever played with VMAXs and tell them to start putting together a Gardevoir deck. I don't know if they're going to be quite as good as someone who played back when Sun and Moon happened.
Yeah, I definitely could understand that. But first regional I ever played in, I played Gardevoir GX, and I would say it was a learning experience because playing a stage two deck at a regional is very time consuming, and I had a lot of ties. I think I had 4 ties throughout the entire event, and I didn't make day two, so it's almost half of my games. And it's definitely the same thing as playing a one prizer deck where your turns are a little more time consuming. There's a little couple more things you have to do. A lot of times you're not just sitting on a big VMAX or a big V star. You have to kind of finesse your way through your turn to get to your win condition. And sometimes if you whiff, you have to, formulate another strategy. So I could definitely see something like that happening again, but I'm actually excited to play this Gardevoir deck. There's a lot of little things I think that deck can do well, although it is going to be a little bit harder to get to those things because the game is so much more intrinsically faster now compared to the early Sun and Moon days. And me personally, I think early Sun and Moon is like one of the highlights of Pokemon's history. The format was just beautiful, and then certain cards got printed like Beast Ring, and certain archetypes became really good like Stall, and then that's kind of where the Sun and Moon era thing falls off a little bit for me. But I think early, it's one of the best places the Pokemon metagame has ever been. And ever since I've gotten back in the game, I've played old formats here and there. Nothing before early like Heart Gold Soul Silver formats. So I know a lot of people are gonna yell at me, "Oh, you haven't played like LBS or things like that." But like, whatever, man. I'm trying to play with powerful, fun cards. I don't know, like playing old formats like that. It doesn't appeal to me as much. They have their own skillful interactions and things that to learn, but I don't know. Once you've gone Chorus for 16, Snorlax for 300 damage, it's hard to go. All right, attach return hit you for 30. Go like I don't know. It's not as fun.
Because you even see like the design philosophy change around like Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Black and White, which is why Expanded starts with Black and White. I was looking through some of my old bulk cards, and there was just random Diamond and Pearl era cards with just the most convoluted abilities, and you can tell they just kind of had a big design shift. Like when I first started collecting cards, I think maybe freshman and sophomore year of high school, kind of got back into playing the game a little bit. I saw, what was it, Dusknor level X, where the whole card is just an ability.
A wall of text.
The entire card, it's just like That's a Yu-Gi-Oh card.
Oh, that is
The
most
whole
definitely
card's
a
just
Yu-Gi-Oh
one
card.
effect. Who knows what it does?
Like it's crazy to think that like how much card games has evolved where there's certain cards that are just walls of text. Like, okay, I have an example. Like on my desk right here, I have a couple Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Like, look at this. This is a little spore, but it's my friend drew a Kirby on it. But look how much it's got like 5 lines of text. Then you take like a old Pokemon card and it's just 2 energy, 50 damage. That's it. Like it's kind of funny to think about stuff like that.
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh also, having played a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh, one issue that I think that Pokemon doesn't have that Yu-Gi-Oh does have is that Yu-Gi-Oh could use a lot more clarity. Like I think a lot of the walls of text in Yu-Gi-Oh could really be cut down to say the exact same thing in like half as many words. And I think Pokemon's been good pretty recently. I just really because I remember especially back like in terms of the way they use language on the cards with abilities, like you look at old supporters and it's like so and so player may do this, he or she may do this, and if he or she does this, the opponent may do this, and he or she may do this. And I was just like, they do this, they do this, they do this. It's like, oh, like same thing, half the amount of text. It's a lot more clarity now in the Pokemon game.
Yeah, simplifying and streamlining card text is definitely really nice, especially for people that aren't super into the game. That way they're able to kind of grasp it easier. So I think what Magic does really well is they have keywords. So they have things like trample that exist, but trample isn't a wall of text. Just okay, trample is this thing that we all know what it does. So we're just going to put the keyword there and it's going to apply a certain effect to the game. So something like lifelink, right? So in Magic, you have 20 life as a player. Once your life goes to 0, you lose the game. Lifelink says whenever you do damage to your opponent, you gain life equal to the amount of damage you've done. So instead of having when this card does damage to your opponent, you gain life equal to that amount of damage you did, it just has lifelink. And I think that's something that the Pokemon company could start adapting, especially because we're a wizard based game. I'm sure there wouldn't be too much of a problem adapting something like that. Something like Flying Pikachu, where we have a card that says, "Oh, this Pokemon can't get hit by basics." So what if it just said immune basics? So okay, you don't take damage
I
from
see.
basics, or something like safeguards. Says, "Oh, this Pokemon can't take damage from rule box Pokemon."
Yeah.
What if it just said immune damage rule box Pokemon? Just 3 keywords instead of a wall, instead of 2 or 3 lines of text. Obviously, would that complicate the game a little bit more for players that are more casual? Probably, but those players probably don't care too much about keywords anyway. Most of the time, there's a pretty strict line between collectors and players, and the collectors aren't going to care what's on the text. They just want the pretty picture
Mm.
of, an Umbreon alt art, and they don't care what the attack does. They don't care about the energy cost. They don't care about the energy cost of anything on it. They just want the pretty picture.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, they've sort of implemented that with like the phrase rule box now, but every card that says rule box also has a little parentheses. It's like, well, a rule box is a Pokemon EX or a Pokemon or Radiant Pokemon dot dot dot. And it literally says etc. So like
Yeah,
I'm sure maybe at some point once they print enough cards that have the rule box phrasing, they'll just start saying so and so just something something rule box instead of then rule box and then a whole another line and a half explaining what is a rule box, Like Pokemon definitely compared to Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic has to toe a bit more of a line of casual player versus competitive player cuz there's a lot more. I mean, just by going to the tournaments that we go to in our local tournaments, a lot more kids getting into the game versus, you know, a random Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. I've never seen like a 5-year-old kid at a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. Maybe there's some really good 5-year-olds,
I'm sure.
but
Probably better
I've
than me.
but I've
Yeah, I think
seen a fair share of
definitely,
kids in Pokemon.
definitely not overcomplicating the cards is good also because Pokemon is way more broad of an audience than the other two card games because it's just the IP. It's the highest selling free media franchise on the planet. So, my grandma probably knows what a Pikachu is. So, being able to have that accessibility is definitely better than not having it, I guess.
Yeah. So, kind of moving on a little bit then into playing the actual TCG, playing the Pokemon TCG. What is your strategy when it comes to deck building, analyzing metagames? I know you mentioned a bit before the show. That's a thing that you feel is a skill of yours. Could you share a little bit with our audience about how to get better at those things?
So I think when you approach a tournament, there's a couple of things that you need to think about before you enter the event. So the couple questions that I like to ask myself are one, what do I think is going to be the most played deck? So if you think about the current moment of Standard, we're sitting in Silver Tempest metagame where a third of every deck is Lugia. So if you were to go to regional, it's easy to assume that if you play 9 rounds, 3 to 4 of your rounds are probably going to be Lugia. So your deck should have a game plan against Lugia going first, going second, going into time. You should have some sort of game plan or approach to that deck in some sort of capacity. So the most popular decks right now are Lugia, and then Mew, and then probably like Reggie or some Arc variants like Dura or
Lost
Pika,
Box.
Lost Box. So if you're going to play a deck, even if it is one of those decks that we just named, you should know, okay, against this deck, this is my strategy going first. Okay, this is my strategy going second. Okay, if they are able to get this combo off, what is my response to that combo? So something like Reggie, if you were to go against a Flying Pikachu deck, you could just say, okay, am I accepting, okay, if I run a Flying Pikachu, am I going to lose or am I going to try to card to beat this combo? So something like Christian Fontenot's deck, he was playing Yellhorn and he was playing Rope, I believe. So he was playing outs to these cards like Ice Q and Pikachu. They're not definitive outs, but there's something that can give you that competitive edge in a tournament setting where, to be honest, if you're going to top 8 a regional, most of it is skill, but there is that luck factor involved where you do kind of have to run a little bit hot. You do kind of have to hit some good matchups here and there. So I would say that definitely analyzing the metagame is a huge thing. Also playing a deck that is consistent. You might play the most powerful deck in the format, but if you only get to play every other game or 2 out of your 5 games that you played, maybe the deck isn't the deck to bring to a regional. That's why I'm a big fan of Zoroark. It's probably the best card ever printed, and it's a reason for that. It was able to attack, it's able to draw you cards, it complements so many other Pokemon well, and it just lets you see more cards. If you are able to dig through your deck faster and thin out the cards that aren't good in a certain matchup, then most of the time if you get End or Marnied or Judged, then the chances of you drawing good cards are going to be higher than not because you're able to kind of thin your deck through those cards that you don't want for this scenario or for this matchup. So even though the power level of Zoroark decks were kind of lower compared to other decks that were in the metagame, the reason it always did so well is because if you played 100 games of Zoroark, chances are 98% of the games you're going to be able to play the game. But if you were to play something like Cephalon, okay, your deck has like 16 energy in it, and then you play a bunch of Pokemon that don't generate advantage, like intrinsically, so stuff like Naganadel and Blacephalon don't get you more cards, they just do damage, right? So having a bunch of those kind of cards in your deck, while your power level is way higher because of cards like Beastring and Welder and the Naganadel attaching energy, the chances of you bricking, let's say if you played 100 games and you bricked 20 games, that's a way higher rate of bricking than something that's more consistent like Zoroark. So me personally, I like to play decks where if I go, all right, if I play 100 games with this deck, how many games am I going to brick? Because if you translate that to a regional setting where, let's say you make it all the way to the finals and most of your games go to game 3, then you're playing what? Upwards of 40 or 50 games throughout the tournament, probably.
Like 40-ish, like 15 rounds, right? 15
Yeah,
plus.
plus top 8, top 4 in finals, another 3 rounds. So 18 rounds times, let's say like 2 to 3 games a round. So somewhere around like 45 to 55 games. So if I play 100 games of this deck and only brick twice, in 55 games, hopefully I only bricked once or twice. And that's going to definitely help me get these better kind of finishes at tournaments.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely what's helped me. If you kind of look at, the history of the decks that I've played, I try to play decks where I go, okay, this deck plays, 20 starter cards, 10 supporters, and, 10 Pokemon that generate me some sort of advantage. So anytime I draw a hand, I have something that's going to let me see more cards. And Pokemon's really good about that, though. A lot of the cards that exist in the format already and in past formats, just, okay, I'm going to discard a card, get another card, or this card's going to search for another card, or this card's going to draw me a bunch of cards. So seeing cards in Pokemon's not easy, or it's not hard, but I guess playing those cards out well is the harder part, and kind of picking like an optimal route to, play your cards and generate advantage and not waste cards. I think that's a huge thing too when I see people play, is they'll play cards to play cards, which
Mew player
I mean
syndrome.
sometimes is correct, I guess,
Yeah.
depends on the situation. And stuff like quick balls and ultra balls and supporters, I see a lot of people, the hand would be like a quick ball and a research, and they'll be like, oh well, I can just quick ball research and grab Crobat. Or well, okay, well, you could have just maybe, if you went first, you could have held that research, and then you don't have that two prize liability in play. And then if you whiffed off your research, okay, now I can quick ball for that Crobat. And then instead of sawing 7 cards, I saw 7 plus my draw for turn plus a couple cards off Crobat. So now instead of seeing the 6 cards off Crobat turn 1, I've now seen 14 or 15 cards turn 2. And then that's going to be the big difference between you whiffing something like double Archaeops plus Lugia V Star and going, oh, well, I drew a Lost Vacuum and 4 energy off of this Crobat. Whoops. Looks like I lost.
Yeah. And I think that's where kind of just skill as a player comes in a little bit versus like playing the decks that, like the phrase of like just playing a deck that plays more games, like playing a deck that sets up more consistently versus a deck that might be not as consistent, but when it sets up, it almost auto wins because it's so strong. Like Lugia kind of seems like that. Palkia seemed like that. Everyone just kind of assumed that in one of your 3 games you're just going to brick. And talking about your example of the finals, I mean, if you think of Isaiah Brandner versus Azul at NAIC, I mean, Brandner's deck was insanely turbo, and he just gets to the point in the last game where he just keeps drawing, and can't set up because Palkia just does that every once in a while. See the same thing with Lugia. It just bricks. But then at the same time, if they set up, they almost always win because they're just so strong versus something like a Zoroark where you have a pretty defined damage cap, but the odds that you set up is so much higher. And that's where player skill comes in to kind of make up that difference, right?
I would definitely agree. I think kind of in these last couple formats, decks have definitely been built to be a little bit more high rolly, where it's, I'm going to roll the dice and I'm going to roll a 10 out of 12. And hopefully that's going to be, my double battle pass, Irida, bucket hands. But sometimes you draw the hands where it's, oh, I drew open double water, triple sobble in a training court. And you're like, oh, keep calling go. And then you just get blown out of the water. Other games, you go, all right, battle pass, go Greninja, bucket, and you just get in there and you set up, you draw a million cards, and then it's really hard for your opponent to, come back from something like that. But I think hopefully going forward into the Scarlet Violet metagame, we see a little bit less high rolliness, especially with the return of higher HP, stage 1 and stage 2 Pokemon, and hopefully weaker big basics. I know Miraidon's not a great start into that trend, considering how broken that card is. But I'm hoping since it's the legendary, it's the box art, that's kind of, where the power creep of basics is going to, the height of it. So we see something like Zacian. Zacian was one of the best basic Pokemon in the game forever, right? ADP Zacian is arguably one of the best standard decks to ever exist. And obviously, Zacian kind of got phased out eventually throughout the metagame just due to certain card effects and decks that existed. But for the early part of Sword and Shield, like Zacian was a menace. That card was everywhere. And even so, even like Zamazenta was a great card, obviously served a different role, but Zacian was pretty broken. And we kind of see that trend with Miraidon again, where it's all right, a basic with a really good ability, with a really good attack that requires, a couple of the energy that it's typing in.
Yeah.
So
An attack that really
okay.
just kind of does the exact same thing, right? It's like 220, can't attack again, right?
Yeah, and then being able to just, get 2 Pokemon out for free, why not, man? Just get those Flaffies
Yeah.
all for free. But yeah, I'm hoping that definitely the player skill gap is kind of more shown in this next format, just because there's going to be a lot more decision making, and I think that's where Pokemon shines a lot. Is that there's a lot more little micro decisions throughout a turn that if you're able to capitalize on, then you have a higher chance of winning. So I actually made a video about this where it talks about how to win a Pokemon game. And I talked about how it's basically imagine you have 2 little health bars, and every time you make a good play, your opponent's health bar goes down a little bit. And every time that you make a misplay, then your health bar goes down a little bit. And it just keeps going until one of your health bars run out. Because really, if 2 people that are, both like nines, right, on the player's skill board, are playing against each other, chances are neither of them are going to make a huge mistake or a huge misplay. And anytime that a player does make a small misplay, even if it doesn't seem huge at the time, those little misplays will build up and
Yeah.
is probably going to be the difference between you winning or losing that game. Like for example, in 2018, my first expanded regional I ever played in, I was playing Zoroark and I was on a roll. I was doing very well, and I was still in contention for top eight. But I go into game three against what I think is the mirror, or maybe it was just Zoroark, and I Colress for 16. I was like, I'm gonna draw my whole deck because I know my opponent's out of Versus Seekers and Ends. They had four Versus Seekers in the discard and an N, and I go, okay, well, I'm gonna have 16 cards in my hand, and my opponent can't end me out of it, so I'm gonna have everything in my deck. I'm gonna win the game next turn. I'm up four prizes, and then my opponent puts down a Bunnelby, mills me for two, and wins the game. And I go, oh, what does that card do? So stuff like that where you can get a little bit overzealous, or even like a lack of knowing what cards do. Because my first expanded regional, I was reading every card that
Yeah,
existed,
there's
right?
so much
I didn't know what
stuff.
anything did. So seeing card like a Bunnelby, I was like, oh, what's an ancient trait? The only ancient trait I had seen before that was maybe like a couple weeks before I had played against Chris Szymanski at Elite Cup, and he put down the Reggie Rock that has the barrier trait. I go, all right, boss Reggie Rock, and he's like, okay. It's like, oh, so you gonna bring it up? And then he's like, oh, read it. I'm like, this card has text at the top. What does this do? And so yeah, some lessons you learn kind of hard.
Yeah, and even kind of like a recent example at Liverpool, there was that deck that got top 64 that was the Cherim Snorlax deck. And I was testing out Lost Box on PTCG when I got paired against that deck, and I'm thinking, well, they were kind of bricking. I got my Sableye activated. I'm like, oh, this is so free. I'm just going to wipe all their Cherubi. They can't win the game. Apparently, Cherubi has an ability, just like Snorlax, that it can't be affected by attacks. So I just place all these damage counters on these Cherubi, and nothing happens. I'm like, huh? What? What just happened? And I do wonder how many people, even at Liverpool, were trying to place damage counters, and they were like, "Wait a second, this doesn't work. This doesn't work." Because who knows?
Yeah,
No one's ever seen that card before. That card hasn't really been played at all. So it's
it,
important to sometimes it really is just like the longer you play, the more you play, the more you know. Just raw knowledge of what all these cards are and their interactions is really important.
even too, I think when a new set comes out, I like to go through and kind of read cards because even in tournament scenarios, there is a chance your opponent might be playing a niche tech card, and just being able to kind of anticipate weird stuff where it's like, okay, well, what can I possibly lose to in this scenario? And you think of this random, Escavalier from, a random black white set, right? And you're like, okay, well, this is like the only card I could ever possibly lose to, so maybe I do a slightly different play so I don't lose to this card. And then your opponent slaps it down, and you're like, oh, thank God I didn't do that, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, stuff like that can only really come from playing more because it's hard to have raw knowledge of just every Pokemon card that's ever existed. It's basically impossible unless you're, I don't know, like Jay Gearhart. Like that guy, he was in my room for the recent regional in Texas, and that guy is an encyclopedia. I don't know. I don't think he might know more about Pokemon than anyone else. That guy's a genius, man.
One thing that just came to mind for me is Tord at Peoria Regionals with his Lost Box deck and playing no Echoing Horn, I think. And I remember in an interview after the tournament, he was saying that everyone at that point was expecting Lost Box to play. I mean, there was lists that were playing like 2, 3, 4 Echoing Horns, and his opponent was playing around an Echoing Horn that Tord did not play. And sometimes even just knowing what do my opponents expect in my deck, and just having something a little bit different could really give you that mental edge. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that and kind of choosing what text to put in a deck, what to put in a deck? Maybe there's some cards that everyone puts in their lists that you really look at them and you go, does that deck really need that card, or are we just putting it in there because some good players said we have to? Like, how do you decide on those like final little cards in your lists?
I'll circle back to an example of a deck I played, but to go over towards deck really quick, which is funny, is I actually played him at that tournament. I played him round two. And so I'd gone to the tournament. I was playing Arc Intel because I'm an Arc Intel fiend. If anybody in the Chicagoland area knows, if before pre-Lugia, I had probably played Arc Intel at every single event I'd gone to. Aside from one regional this season, I've played pre-Lugia. I have played Arc Intel at every event I've gone to. Um, played it at Worlds. I played it in Baltimore. I played it in Indianapolis. I played it for every case tournament and locals that we've pretty much had over here. So definitely the deck I've gotten the most reps of recently.
Yeah.
And I had played against Tord round two, and I had Parasol, Marnie attach, knock out your Pokemon. He goes, all right, lost vacuum. I was like, all right, whatever, that's kind of annoying. The game keeps going and going and going. I would get to another board state where I go, all right, big charm, Roxanne, smack your guy. And then he goes, all right, lost vacuum away, big charm, knockout Lazard. And I'm like, how many lost vacuums does this guy play? Like, I was just baffled the whole time. And I was playing Lost City too. I like put down Lost City, banish this guy, be like, all right, lost vacuum, Lost City. I'm like, bro, this guy plays 3 lost vacuum? And like, I just remember because we had gotten to really deep game 2. Like, I had seen every single card in his deck at the end of game 2. And I was just thinking, like, man, this guy doesn't play Echoing Horn. This guy plays 3 Lost Vacuum. Like, this is crazy. He plays Cross Switcher. Like, I was tilted, man. I was like, holy shit, this guy's deck's insane. But yeah, like something like that where I was playing around cards that just didn't exist. Because I remember I had Ultra Balled away like a Sobble that I know I didn't need, but I was like, okay, well, I have to rod that back into the deck because it's just going to get Echoing Horn and put back in. So I probably used an Ordinary Rod preemptively where maybe if I had used it at a different spot in the game, it would have been, again, that little health bar that I had and Tord had. Mine maybe would have been a little bit, more green, and his would have been a little bit more red, and maybe I could have squeaked out that game. But in me playing around a card that doesn't exist, then Tord gets that little bit of edge, even though obviously he built his deck to do stuff like that to people, but it's something that we're thinking about, that we're playing around, actively, but it's not doing anything for us. And that's kind of the genius that Tord does a lot, actually. If you look at a lot of his list, he does little Jedi mind tricks like that constantly. But to circle back to what I was going to say earlier, before this little tangent, was if you think back to the 2019 metagame, where people were playing Jirachi in almost every deck, I had seen a list on, I want to say Twitter maybe, where it was Pikarom with Lysander Labs. Lysander Labs said that no tool in play has an effect. And this wasn't a super popular card at the moment just because, again, most people were playing Jirachi. They opted to, stick those escape boards in their deck and a bunch of switching cards. And I was like, this deck's kind of neat. So I built it, and I played it for a couple of locals, and I was like, wow, this card is ridiculous. Like, people don't play around Lysander Labs. And at that point, people weren't teching that many stadiums into their deck. Like, Ability Zard maybe played 2 or 3 stadiums. Pika played 2 stadiums. Malamar maybe played 3 stadiums, maybe 4 stadiums. But if you were able to stick that card into play against a lot of those decks that you knew were probably going to be playing Jirachi, they would just not have a way to retreat out the active, and then it would, get rid of random stuff too, like Spell Tag, again, like a skateboard, just random counter gain was also a big one at the time, where, certain stall decks would play counter game to, be able to attack with their, random baby attacker with counter energy counter gain, and just sometimes it would happen where I'd stick a Lysander Labs in play, my opponent would read it, forget about it, and they would go, all right, attach a skateboard to Jirachi, retreat. I'm like, oh, you can't do that. They'd be like, what do you mean? It's like, oh, well, if you read this card, it says, tools have no play. You have no effect in play. You'll go, oh, pass. All right, free. Boss, kill your guy. Game. And so, little things like that where if you can kind of metagame the metagame and think, okay, if I'm going to see a bunch of this card, what's one card that can answer this little thing? And being able to think like that can definitely be the difference between doing okay in a tournament and doing really well in a tournament.
Yeah.
For example, the first regional I had played the Pika Labs deck in was Madison 2019, and I ended up getting top 16 at that event. And I think I had lost 1 mirror throughout the whole day, because everyone was playing the Jirachi version. I was able to smoke everybody playing that. I had played against 3 Weezings. Lysander Labs put in infinite work against Weezing because they can't spell tag you. And then things like, the Malamar decks, again, they can't spell tag you. They can't retreat out of with the skateboard. So just little things like that can add up throughout the tournament where if your opponent misplays once against you in a game, that could be the difference between you winning or losing that game. and then that can just snowball because a lot of times if your opponent misplays, a lot of people don't have that mental fortitude to like not get tilted in that
Yeah.
game where it's like, oh my god, I did a stupid misplay, and they're like, oh, beating themselves up the whole game, and you're just gonna play worse if you do things like that throughout the day. Because it definitely happened to me where I go, man, that was a stupid play. Why did I do that? And I just have to, all right, forget about it. We'll just keep moving. What's over is done. You just got to keep playing, well throughout the rest of these games. Uh, like, funnily enough, at Madison the year before, I came back from lunch break late, and so I sat down against my opponent. The judge explains to me, hey, if you're late, you guys can't tie. Like your opponent automatically gets the win since you didn't show up on time. And I was like, oh man, I got to play really fast. And I remember like 2-0ing my opponent like 10 minutes. We played the Zoroark mirror. I went first. I go attach fighting to Rockruff, and that was it. I threw at him real quick. And so things like that is like maybe if I had not thought, okay, well, I have to play super fast and I played at a regular pace, maybe we get towards the end of game two and we, draw, but we can't draw because I was late. And then that win or potential tie ends up being a loss, and then that affects the whole rest of my tournament. So playing through little inconveniences like that is definitely a huge part of tournaments as well.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of an interesting question of understanding time in a tournament. Like, was it at Peoria? Peoria is actually a good example for a lot of this stuff. We can kind of jump back to the meta stuff in a minute, but speaking of time, in Peoria, I was, if one of my ties was a win, would have made day two, and a lot of that was because I would play out games really slowly or not really know when to scoop as kind of a somewhat newer player or hasn't gotten to as much regionals as other players. How is that a skill that someone can learn? Knowing, like, what pace do I have to play at? When is it time to start to go turbo mode? When is it time to, I don't have enough time to check my prizes. I just have to, get going. When is it time to scoop? How is that a skill someone can work on?
So I would say that if you go into a tournament, you should know your whole deck list by heart. That is the number one thing to know, because if you go into a tournament and you go, wait, am I playing 7 water energy or am I playing 8 water energy? Am I playing 4? Am I playing 3 level ball or am I playing 2 level ball? You should know your whole list by heart before you enter the tournament. While you're submitting your deck list, you should just go, okay, I'm playing 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Quick Ball, 2 Evo Incense, 3 level ball, 3 Sobble, 4 Sobble, 3 Drizzle, 1 Intel. You should be saying these things constantly over and over again until it's ingrained in your brain. Because if you're doing quick deck searches, you should be able to determine most of your prize cards in your first, deck search. That's why it really irks me when people take 3 to 4 minute, initial deck searches, because it shouldn't be that time consuming to know what your prizes are. Unless it's, a bigger, more grand stage where it's like, okay, I'm in the finals of a regional. Maybe I will take a little bit of extra time just to make sure actually sure of what my prizes are. But if you're playing it, your local league, then you don't need to be taking 4 minute deck searches to be able to absolutely determine what all your prize cards are. You should know, okay, I looked through my deck. Okay, I'm missing, an Inteleon. Okay, I only saw 2 Palkia, so I know 1 Palkia V is prize. Stuff like that, where if you kind of go through your first deck search, you go, okay, I kind of know like 3 or 4 of my prizes, then that should pretty much be good enough. Because then, you take a knockout and you go, I grabbed the water off the prize. Okay, so now I know 5 of my prizes. So little things like that, where if you're going into like a game 3 scenario where there's not too much time left, then you kind of have to pick up on little stuff like that. Just playing the game, you go, okay, well, I level balled and I didn't see the other level ball was going through my deck, so I know one of my prizes are a level ball. So you have to think about stuff like that, because that might be the extra 10 seconds that you go, okay, well, my 6th prize is a level ball, but I already knew that before I picked I knew that like the first time going through my deck, just doing my initial like deck search for this Sobble. And that could be the difference between you at the end of the game going, okay, whatever Arceus attack is called, Ultimate Nova, what is it?
Trinity Nova?
Trinity Nova. Trinity Nova for knockout, and then time gets
Ultimate
called.
Ray is ADP's attack.
Yeah, that one. The other Arceus card.
Yeah.
And that could be the difference between you attacking and then now your opponent draws a turn and they go time, and now you have an extra turn now. So now maybe you can actually win this game, even though you're in a time scenario. But if maybe you thought about that little thing for that extra 10 seconds, maybe you go, okay, and you're about to announce your attack, and they go, all right, time and round. Okay, now your turn 0. So now you don't get that extra turn to maybe take another knockout, potentially win the game. Other things I would recommend is arts are actually huge. Myself personally, I like playing with full art cards because they're way more easily distinguishable within your deck, especially trainers. If you're playing a deck that is like 4 research, 4N, and expanded, then it's a little bit less important because okay, you kind of know. All right, I play 8 supporters and 4 of them do the same thing on each side. But if you're going to be playing something like Arcantelion, right, where it's like, okay, I'm going to play 2 Sharon, 2 Marnie, 1 Raihan, 1 Melanie, 1 Boss, 1 Serena, and you're playing all these one ofs, it's way easier to look through your deck and go, okay, I know that full art Serena is, it's like brown and red, right? So, oh, I didn't see the brown and red card, or okay, I was looking through my deck and I only saw one, blue full art supporter, so I know one of my Melanies is prized. So just that color recognition and art recognition is huge. I know like sometimes if I go to a tournament, if I'm playing like 2 Inteleon, sometimes you go back and forth between your card counts. Maybe I'll play like 1 reverse holo one and then 1 holo rare one. So when I'm looking through my deck, okay, I was like, okay, I didn't see the reverse Inteleon, but I did see a Inteleon, so I know that the holo one's in there. So okay, I prize one of my Inteleons. So little things like that are really important. Um, Me personally, I like reversing my whole deck out, so being able to know the arts of your cards too. So if I go, okay, I'm playing the oldest print Palpad, so it has a different type of distinguishable pattern on the reverse holo. I know, okay, I didn't see that type of reverse holo in my deck, so maybe my Palpad's prized. And then being able to just know those little things is okay. So my initial deck search, okay, now I know Inteleon and Palpad is prized, so I can play my game differently now, and I know what 2 of my prizes are just off of like that initial first deck search where that might have saved me 20 or 30 seconds throughout the game. And if I do that 2 or 3 times throughout a game, I'm saving 2 minutes a game. So then at the end of the game, instead of having 10 minutes left, I have 16 minutes left. And that time can be huge.
Yeah. And part of what saves time a lot too is also just practicing certain matchups. Like, especially with some of the decks right now that take really long decisions, like Inteleon decks, Lost Box decks. It's important to just know your matchups because you might Colress and you have 5 cards and maybe one's a battle pass, you want to toss it. Then you have 4 cards and you're against a matchup where maybe this card, maybe I need this card, maybe I don't need this card. I haven't really practiced this matchup, and you just spend like 30 seconds just staring at these cards, right? Or you're playing an Inteleon deck and you do your first search with Drizzile and you're like, what do I need to start winning this matchup? What combo of cards am I looking for here? If you're not used to those matchups, you could just be staring at your deck trying to figure it out. Like, you can't always just learn the matchup as you play. It's so much better to just know what your game plan is and know how to do those things quicker to not waste time.
I'll definitely say that's huge is the paralysis by analysis where you just kind of overthink things. And I think a lot of people do kind of have that problem where they're thinking to the super utmost degree of if I do this, will I lose? But they're not really thinking like, oh, how do I win? Or what is the best route for me to take? Or like you said too, just playing certain matchups will help you play decks out faster because if you're playing against, I don't know, for take like Flying Pikachu for example, right? If I know that I'm playing a 1/1 Aerodactyl line and I'm playing against Reggie, I'm not gonna need my Aerodactyl against this Reggie deck, right? So, but maybe if you handed somebody a deck for the first time and they weren't super familiar with all the cards, and they go, "Oh, I have an Aerodactyl in my hand turn 1. Oh, we bench this card. He looks kind of neat." And then he gets bossed and killed, turn 2. And you're like, "Oh man, maybe I shouldn't have benched that Aerodactyl." So yeah, little things like that can definitely help, especially at like the kind of novice to middling player level. I would say like the 3 to 5s that are kind of getting into the game that don't have a grasp on every card that exists, or they're still kind of learning card interactions and what cards do. Definitely just grinding out games, like I said earlier, is the best way to get better. And if you have someone in your area that's like a good player or has played for a long time that is like solid, then it's definitely good to just say, hey, you go to league one day and you're 30 minutes where you're like, hey man, you mind if we play some games out? We can grind like, oh, do you have this deck? I want to play this matchup, or maybe you own both decks, right? And they can just play decks well, so So you're playing uh like Lost Box, right? And you're like, man, I really need to test this Reggie matchup. And you go, all right, well, I have Reggie here and I have Lost Box. Can you play this Reggie deck for me? And I want to test the matchup. So, little things like that, because not everybody has every deck built. They're not weird like me.
Well, he's pulling it out.
Well, that's fine. I got 5 decks in here plus my other main deck box, and just be able to grind out whatever deck I want to play.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, it's a lot cheaper than stuff like Yu-Gi-Oh, but anyone who plays a TCG, it like at some level is like a privileged hobby because you just have money to spend on all this cardboard. So,
Yeah.
not every player is going to have that kind of time and energy that they're willing to put into the game at the moment. If you're a newer player, you'll have your one deck that you're probably grinding a lot, and if that deck needs changes, you might not always have access to the cards that you need. So it's nice to try to get practice from the people who are able to help you out. And most players are willing to just play matchups, talk through matchups. Like TCG players are generally pretty friendly in my experience, mostly.
And even Pokemon, what's really nice about the game is that, like we've said, the game itself is really cheap. So, I mean, a lot of the times, if someone goes, "Oh man, I really need a Raihan," man, here you can just have a Raihan. Like that's why if you've ever seen me at Chicagoland events, um, just speaking to the audience, I have this giant red box that if you've ever seen me at events, I'm probably carrying this thing around, and it is just filled with cards. And a lot of them are just generic staples and just cheap cards that if I go to a tournament, it's like, okay, I'm gonna bring this just in case someone comes up to me and they go, oh man, I really need like a Raihan, and they don't have it at the store. Can I have one or can I borrow one? I'm like, all right, here you go, man. Like at the Top Cut Case tournament that happened last weekend, Michael Davidson, who's one of the best senior players in the whole world, comes up to me and he goes, hey, do you have like this giant list of cards? I'm trying to play Control today. And I'm like, yeah, I got you. And I handed him like 4 Snorlax, a Sydney, an Eldegoss, like whatever, little control cards he needed. And I was like, all right, well, here you go, man. Make sure I get back at the end of the day or whatever. And he got top 8, like, there you go. So maybe if he didn't have access to those cards and he played a different deck, maybe he doesn't do as well. So it's little things like that where as TCG players, generally 99.9% of people, especially in the Chicagoland area, are really helpful. They're really nice. They're gonna help you out if you need it. Even if you go to tournaments, like last night at TGS, or 2 days ago at TGS, my friend Mike and my friend Gage had gone to the tournament. Neither of them had decks, and I was like, "Here's a deck for you. Here's a deck for you. Go pay your $6 and let's get going." So it's little stuff like that. Like if people need decks, a lot of the times people around here, it's a pretty competitive scene, so most people have multiple decks. So if you ever need a deck, just go to a tournament. I'm sure somebody's gonna have something for you, right? And that's what I really do like about Pokemon community.
I remember in 2019, one of my friends came out to a tournament with me, and he didn't have a deck, and I was still getting into the game, so I only had one deck at the time. And one of the judges, Greg Smith, actually was just like, "Hey, here's Pikarom." Had staff Jirachis in it, like full art Pikaroms. Like, "Hey, borrow this deck. Why not?" Which, not everyone, not saying everyone has to be willing to give away decks that have that much rare cards in them, but people are very generous, and it is pretty great to see.
Yeah, Greg's built different. Definitely one of my favorite judges in the Chicagoland area. Definitely very knowledgeable, very professional. He's a great guy. He's pretty funny too. I know we like to mess with him a lot, but yeah, Greg's a good guy.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad he's a judge in this scene over here.
Hmm. Yeah, we are pretty fortunate that we, also have a lot of, not to just keep talking about Chicago people, if anyone from not in the areas, we're just listing off names of people you've never heard of, but we have Josh Granning, we have Greg Smith, a lot of judges in the area who really know what they're doing. Rob at Top Cut,
Top Cut.
a lot of great
Rachel is
people.
another
Rachel,
fantastic judge. It's pretty
definitely.
well known throughout the community. I mean, some of these people are pretty popular. Like Josh, he runs the Day One events Twitter page, and he runs the Top Cut Twitter page. So I'm sure a lot of people know who he is. Greg's been a judge for a long time. Rachel's, again, she's been a judge for a long time, and I think she did like seniors world championship finals or
Yeah,
something,
she's
right?
been
She
on
was
she's been on stream like for some of the
yeah,
big matches a few
they're not
times.
nobodies. We got some high profile judges over here. We're kind of nice in Chicago,
Yeah, shout
man.
out the judges. They're very nice.
Yeah, shout out to the judges. You guys are the heart and soul of the game. Honestly, without judges, we wouldn't have tournaments. So I'm really thankful to them for being able to come out and do things like that for us.
Definitely.
Because it's one of those like uh like thankless jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
it's a
I don't know
tedious
what the
job,
compensation is for a judge at a regional, but they do a lot of work.
and it should be more. They should.
Whatever it is, it should be more.
Yeah, it should be more. It should
Yeah.
be triple what it is now. Especially because most of the time it's just products. So give a couple extra boxes, Pokemon. You're a
Oh yeah.
multi-billion-dollar company, man. I know you got it.
Big Pikachu. Just they got the
Yeah,
money.
Pikachu's like the next Mickey Mouse. They're both rats, right?
You got
That's the
big
conspiracy for
you
today.
got two different big mice running the world. There we go.
And Hello Kitty's a cat, so that's like the third one right there.
That's true. There we go. It's all coming together.
All coming
It's all
together, right?
mixed. My third eye is opening as we speak. To kind of get us wrapped up, something that you mentioned earlier about you playing so much Arc Intel got me thinking. You have played a lot of Arc Intel. You've played a lot of Zoroark. Would you say those are kind of your top two favorite cards of all time? Because I do see some similarity with, there's kind of a common thread with everything you've been saying about, play a deck that plays the most games, play a deck that gives you a lot of options. Arceus V-Star, Zoroark GX both do those things. Is that why you're so attracted to those two cards?
So if you think about card games kind of at a base level, a lot of people are attracted to certain archetypes. And I don't mean like, oh, you like the Arceus archetype. It's Arceus would fall into the category of like a mid-range deck where the deck is a little slow at the start, but it's going to continue to get stronger throughout the game as it goes because it's able to manage resources and, pile on different effects, and it's going to have a strong mid to late game, right? If you think about something like Mew is an aggro deck, right? It just wants to get in there and go fast and go quick. Obviously, we have the DT variations now with Path, which would be kind of more of a mid-range deck now. But if you think of like the Meloetta Mew decks of early iterations, that's a very aggressive deck. If you think about Arceus and Teleon, you think about different Zoroark variants. For me personally, those are decks I really enjoy because, like again, they kind of do the same thing where they're a little slow at the start. Maybe they're not as powerful as other decks where their ceiling might be like a 6 or 7 when the best deck in the game might be like an 8 or a 9 or a 10, but they're going to let you do more things and have more options throughout the game, which is where a huge factor of, I think, player skill comes into play, where just having the options in your deck to be able to do more things is going to help you play out of certain scenarios and like situations and have certain advantages over certain matchups. Because even if you're playing an unfavorable matchup, if you're able to kind of finesse your way around it, you might be able to get out of a sticky scenario or outplay your opponent to a point where even a bad matchup is doable. So I think decks like Zoroark and Arceus do allow you to have those type of options. Um, but sometimes you just gotta go burn, man. I played Pikachu Zekrom for a long time. Like that deck is probably one of my favorite aggro decks ever, just because it just goes, man. Sometimes you just go, boss up Mew, full blitz. All right, triple E power, kill your 3 prizer, knock out your Lele on the bench, and game is over in 2 turns. It's like, oh, well, that was fun. So yeah, definitely, you have to kind of figure out what kind of decks that you like, because a lot of the times, in my personal opinion, you're gonna play decks you like more, or you're gonna play decks that you like better than the best deck in the game usually. Because right now, I've been forcing myself to play a lot of Lugia just because it is the best deck in the game currently. Through statistically, right, it has the highest win percentage. I'm pretty sure, um, in a regional level. And if you go to top 8 of any regional, there's always at least one Lugia there, if not multiples. So, do I like Lugia a lot? I mean, it's pretty fun to play, to be honest. So you get to just throw a bunch of Pokemon cards at your opponent's face, and there's a lot of different cool cards interactions you play just because your whole deck is a toolbox, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm a personal fan of, toolbox decks too, where you kind of have something for every scenario. Because if your deck is overly linear, it's hard to play out of like weird scenarios and decks like Reggie, for example. Reggie's an example of like a very linear deck. It just put a Reggie down, put another Reggie down, get them all down, ability, attack. And that's why it folds his stuff easily, like Ice Cube and Flying Pikachu, because the deck doesn't have a lot of options to really play around stuff like that. So, but if you have like a Zoroark deck and you're playing like Zoroark plus Garbodor. Okay, I can use my Zoroark in the early game to kind of build advantage up and get like little chip damage down. And then 5 turns into the game, my opponent has 8 items in the discard. All right, I'm gonna attach a Psychic to my one prize or hit you for 160. My Zoroark hit you for 50 or 70 damage earlier, and that little damage is gonna add up to big one prize knockouts later. And just being able to force your opponent to play into your game plan is a huge thing too. Is a little bit less of it now because there isn't really Pokemon that punish like game actions now. Like there has been in the past where it's like, oh, like Garbotoxin and Trash Lance were huge examples of that before, where, for example, at the Philadelphia regional, where I want to say Buzzgarb Shrine was like first really popularized. I was playing Zoroark, Garbodor, Weavile, so I was just like, instead of like the bunch of draw sports, I was just playing Zoroark, so it's kind of playing like a similar archetype to that. And I would play against decks like Rayquaza, where I look at their discard pile, 10 turns into the game, and it's like, oh, you have 29 items in your discard pile. Yeah, I'm just gonna trash at you for 5,000 damage.
Yeah.
And so like little things like that, where uh being able to approach metagame, like I said earlier, you're able to go in there and go, all right, well, Rayquaza's a popular deck. That deck plays 40 items, so we play this trash line. It's one prizer that's going to obliterate them every single turn. Little things like that.
Yeah, and Trash Lines honestly would go pretty crazy right now. Imagine everyone just
Trash lines would be
get
so dumb right
all those
now.
VIP passes you used, to have them knock you out now. Your punishment for that.
Weird Mew player. You have 4 tab, 3 battle pass, 4 ultra ball, 3 quick balls. Oh, this trash lands for 10,000.
Oh god, it'd be so tough to play Mew. You just get Drapion one turn and then Trash Lance the next. Just nothing else. There's nothing you can do.
Oh, that'd be terrible.
I don't know. Mew's life just keeps getting harder and they just keep winning. So we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I don't know, man. They keep adapting. Like, Mew is kind of similar to like Zoroark, where it's just kind of always good. We always kind of have that deck of the format where no matter what happens, man, the deck will just not die. And that was kind of like the case with like Zoro and then like Pika. Pika was played almost throughout its entire time in Standard, just kind of different new iterations or new techs. And we kind of see that with Mew now, where people just don't want to put the deck down because it's so powerful. Like Genesect is a Yu-Gi-Oh card. That is not a Pokemon card. Genesect is so broken. They just banned Shaman and they're like, just put on another basic. There you go, Genesect.
Yeah, there you go. On that note, I think I'll wrap us up. I know we didn't get to touch on Expanded too much, but hopefully in the future we'll get to talk again and have a whole Expanded episode. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. Thank you for Dan for being on the show. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. If anyone wants to follow you, see what you're up to, where can they find you?
You can follow me at the DefCon Inc. on Twitter. I post a lot about Pokemon stuff and, just kind of thoughts and discussions about the game. And sometimes I post YouTube links when I post. I'm kind of inactive at the moment just because, real life stuff has to come before YouTube stuff. And recently my family opened a business, so we've been kind of all hands on deck with that. But I uploaded a video recently with Christian Fontenot. He's a local Chicago player too, on his top 8 run, and I plan on doing more stuff like that in the future. I just need to be a little bit more consistent with uploading. But again, you can follow me on YouTube or subscribe me on YouTube at DefCon Inc. It's DEFCONINC. And you'll see me at Pokemon tournaments with this big old red box. So if you need a Raihan, let me know.
If you need a deck.
Yeah, if you need a deck,
the morning of a regionals.
I got like 7 of them.
Yeah. If you want to consider following the podcast, well, you can give it a follow on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you're listening. Give us a review, give us a rating. It'd be really appreciated. If you want to follow us on social media, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at MemCapPodcast. Or if you want to follow me, you can follow me at RZGladys on Twitter. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.